The morning sun streamed through the curtains of Naomi Williams' bedroom, filling the room with a warm golden glow. It was the day she had dreamed about since she was a little girl. Today, she would marry the man she believed was the love of her life. Her heart raced with excitement as she stood before the mirror in her white wedding gown. The dress fit her perfectly, flowing gracefully to the floor with delicate lace decorating the sleeves. Her long black hair was neatly styled beneath a sparkling veil, and the gentle smile on her face made her look even more beautiful. Her mother, Mrs. Williams, walked into the room carrying a small bouquet of white roses. Tears filled her eyes as she admired her daughter. "You look like an angel," she whispered. Naomi smiled and hugged her tightly. "Thank you for always believing in me, Mom." Mrs. Williams gently touched her daughter's cheek. "I've prayed for this day for many years. Brian is a lucky man." Naomi laughed softly. "I feel like the lucky one." She truly believed it. Brian Daniels had proposed to her 2 years earlier with promises of forever. He had showered her with gifts, taken her on expensive vacations, and introduced her proudly to his family and friends. Everyone said they were the perfect couple. Naomi never imagined that anything could go wrong. After breakfast, the bridal team arrived to finish her makeup. Her cousins laughed. Her friends took pictures. Music filled the house as everyone celebrated. Only one person was missing: Vanessa, Naomi's best friend. Vanessa had promised to help her get dressed before leaving for the church, but she had sent a message saying she would meet everyone there instead. Naomi wasn't worried. Vanessa had always been unpredictable. Soon, the wedding convoy left for the grand church in the heart of the city. The church was beautifully decorated with fresh flowers, white ribbons, and glittering chandeliers. Elegant guests filled every seat, chatting happily while waiting for the ceremony to begin. Brian stood confidently at the altar in an expensive black tuxedo. He smiled as people congratulated him. Everything appeared perfect. Outside, Naomi took a deep breath before stepping out of the limousine. "This is really happening," she whispered. Her father offered his arm. "Ready?" She nodded with a bright smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." As they prepared to enter, one of the bridesmaids rushed toward Naomi. "Naomi, Brian asked if you could meet him quickly in the pastor's office before the ceremony starts." Naomi frowned slightly. "Now?" "Yes, he said it's important." Without suspecting anything, Naomi handed her bouquet to her mother. "I'll be right back." She walked down the quiet hallway toward the pastor's office. The corridor was almost empty. As she reached the door, she noticed it wasn't fully closed. She was about to knock when she heard laughter. A woman's laughter. It sounded familiar, very familiar. Her smile slowly disappeared. Then she heard Brian's voice. "I can't believe we're finally doing this." Naomi froze. Vanessa giggled. "I was tired of pretending to be happy for Naomi." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She slowly pushed the door open just enough to see inside. Her world shattered. Brian and Vanessa were locked in a passionate kiss. Brian's hands rested around Vanessa's waist while she smiled at him lovingly. Naomi felt as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. The bouquet of flowers decorating the hallway blurred before her eyes. Her breathing became uneven. She wanted to believe she was imagining it. But then Brian spoke again. "I should have chosen you from the beginning." Vanessa laughed. "You only stayed with Naomi because everyone thinks she's the perfect woman." Brian shrugged. "She was useful. She made me look like a good man." Naomi's entire body trembled. Vanessa gently touched Brian's face. "Does she suspect anything?" Brian chuckled. "Not at all. She's too trusting." Vanessa smiled proudly. "I almost felt bad wearing the bridesmaid dress." Brian laughed. "You'll only wear it for a few more minutes." They kissed again. Naomi covered her mouth to stop herself from crying out. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Her chest felt tight. Every memory she had shared with Brian flashed through her mind. The birthdays, the vacations, the promises, the late-night conversations about their future. Every word suddenly felt like a lie. Then Vanessa spoke again. "When are you going to tell her?" Brian smiled without an ounce of guilt. Right after she reaches the altar, Vanessa burst into laughter. I want to see her face. Brian smirked. So do I. Naomi could not bear another second. The door suddenly swung open as her trembling hand pushed against it. Brian and Vanessa turned around in shock. Their smiles vanished. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Naomi looked at both of them with tears streaming down her face. Her voice shook. How long? Neither of them answered. Naomi repeated the question, louder this time. How long have you been betraying me? Vanessa folded her arms without looking ashamed. A little over a year. Naomi stared at her in disbelief. My best friend. Vanessa rolled her eyes. You always got everything. The attention. The compliments. The perfect fiancé. Naomi looked at Brian. You told me you loved me. Brian sighed. I thought I did. You proposed to me. I know. You asked me to spend forever with you. Brian shrugged carelessly. People change. Naomi felt as though someone had stabbed her heart. So, all this was a lie? Brian didn't even try to deny it. I don't love you anymore. The words hit harder than any slap. Naomi struggled to breathe. I was going to tell everyone after you reached the altar. Vanessa smiled proudly as she stepped beside Brian. We belong together. Naomi looked from one face to the other. The two people she had trusted most had destroyed her life in a single moment. Before she could respond, several family members entered the hallway, wondering why the ceremony had not started. They stopped immediately. Everyone stared at the shocking scene. Mrs. Williams looked confused. Naomi, what's happening? Naomi couldn't speak. Brian walked toward the gathering without any shame. I think everyone deserves to know the truth. The church fell silent. Guests leaned forward to listen. Brian slipped his arm around Vanessa's waist. I've fallen in love with Vanessa. Gasps echoed throughout the church. Mrs. Williams covered her mouth in horror. Naomi's father clenched his fists. The bridesmaids stood frozen. Vanessa smiled as if she had just won a prize. Brian looked directly at Naomi. I can't marry someone I don't love. Whispers spread across the church. I can't believe this. On the wedding day? Poor Naomi. Naomi stood completely still. She felt hundreds of eyes staring at her. Humiliation burned through every part of her body. Her dream wedding had turned into her worst nightmare. Tears streamed down her face as she slowly removed her engagement ring. She looked at Brian one last time. I hope one day you understand what you've thrown away. Without waiting for a response, Naomi turned and ran out of the church, her wedding dress trailing behind her as the guests watched in stunned silence. Outside, she stopped beneath the bright afternoon sky, tears blinding her vision. The joyful sounds from inside the church faded behind her, replaced by the crushing weight of betrayal. She had arrived believing she was about to begin the happiest chapter of her life. Instead, she walked away with a broken heart, unaware that fate was about to lead her toward a love she had never imagined. Naomi stumbled out of the church with tears pouring down her face. Her white wedding dress dragged across the stone steps, collecting dust, but she didn't care. Everything she had dreamed of had fallen apart in a matter of minutes. The laughter of the guests echoed behind her. Some people whispered in pity. Others secretly enjoyed the drama. Naomi wiped her tears with trembling hands and kept walking until she reached the front gate of the church. She couldn't breathe. Her chest felt heavy, and her heart ached with every step. How could they do this to me? She whispered. She had loved Brian with all her heart. She had trusted Vanessa like a sister. Yet the two people closest to her had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. She sat on a low concrete bench beside the church gate, trying to stop herself from crying. But the tears refused to stop. She buried her face in her hands. I wasn't enough, she whispered. A calm voice interrupted her thoughts. You shouldn't blame yourself. Naomi slowly looked up. Standing a few feet away was a man she hadn't noticed before. He looked to be in his early 30s. His clothes were old and worn. His dark trousers were patched in several places. A faded gray hoodie hung loosely over a simple white t-shirt that had clearly seen better days. His sneakers were dusty and slightly torn. His beard was neatly trimmed despite his appearance, and although his clothes suggested he had nothing, his face was remarkably handsome. His calm brown eyes carried a quiet confidence that surprised her. He held out a clean white handkerchief. "For your tears." Naomi hesitated. Most people walked past homeless people without even looking at them. Yet this stranger was comforting her. She slowly accepted the handkerchief. "Thank you." He nodded gently. "My name is Ethan. I'm Naomi." "I know." She looked at him in surprise. "You do." He smiled softly. "Half the church knows your name now." Naomi lowered her head in embarrassment. "I suppose you're right." Ethan sat on the opposite end of the bench, giving her enough space to feel comfortable. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Cars continued arriving and leaving the church while guests whispered excitedly about the scandal. Naomi sighed. "My life is over." Ethan shook his head. "No." She looked at him. "It feels like it." "It feels that way today," he replied calmly. "But one terrible day doesn't decide the rest of your life." His words were simple, yet they carried an unexpected warmth. Naomi studied him. "How can you sound so hopeful?" He smiled faintly. "Because life has disappointed me more times than I can count." She noticed he spoke with unusual confidence, not like someone who had completely given up on life. Before she could ask another question, loud laughter came from behind them. "Brian, Vanessa." Several guests followed them outside. Brian laughed as soon as he saw Naomi sitting beside Ethan. "Look at this." Vanessa covered her mouth dramatically. "Poor Naomi." Brian smirked. "I guess even the homeless are comforting you now." Several guests laughed awkwardly. Others looked away in discomfort. Naomi slowly stood. Her eyes were still red from crying, but something inside her had begun to change. The sadness was slowly giving way to anger. Brian folded his arms. "You should probably go home." Vanessa smiled proudly as she wrapped her arm around Brian's. "You've embarrassed yourself enough today." Naomi stared at them. "No." Brian frowned. "No, I've been embarrassed because of you." She took a deep breath. "But not anymore." Brian laughed. "What exactly are you going to do?" Naomi looked at Ethan. He quietly watched the exchange without saying a word. An unexpected thought flashed through her mind. It was crazy, completely crazy, but somehow felt right. She turned toward Ethan. "I know this is sudden." He looked at her quietly. "But would you marry me?" Silence. The laughter disappeared instantly. Every guest froze. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Brian blinked. "What?" Vanessa burst into loud laughter. "She's lost her mind." Several guests gasped. Mrs. Williams hurried outside. "Naomi, what are you saying?" Naomi never looked away from Ethan. "I'm serious." Ethan searched her face carefully. He could see the pain in her eyes, the humiliation, the broken trust. He also knew this decision would change both of their lives. He spoke gently. "Why me?" Naomi swallowed hard. "Because even after seeing me at my worst, you offered kindness." She looked directly into his eyes. "You didn't laugh at me. You didn't judge me. You simply tried to comfort me." A tear rolled down her cheek. "The man I was supposed to marry couldn't even give me that." Brian laughed loudly. "This is ridiculous." Vanessa nodded. "He's homeless." Naomi turned toward them. "So what?" The crowd fell silent again. "So what if he doesn't have expensive clothes? So what if he has no mansion? So what if he owns nothing?" She pointed toward Brian. "You had everything." She then pointed toward Ethan. "And he has nothing." Her voice became stronger. "But today," she looked Brian straight in the eyes, "the man with nothing showed me more kindness than the man who claimed to love me." Even some guests nodded quietly. Brian's smile faded. Naomi faced Ethan again. "I'm not asking because I pity you. I'm asking because I'd rather spend my life with a good-hearted homeless man than with a wealthy liar." Mrs. Williams stepped closer. My daughter. Naomi held her mother's hand. I know this sounds unbelievable. It probably is. But I cannot let Brian destroy my happiness forever. She turned back to Ethan. If your answer is no, I'll understand. Ethan remained silent. Inside, his thoughts raced. He had spent months living as a homeless man. Many people ignored him. Others insulted him. Some threw food at him. Not one person had ever looked at him the way Naomi was looking at him now. She wasn't seeing his torn clothes. She wasn't seeing his empty pockets. She was seeing the person behind them, exactly what he had been searching for. Richard's words echoed in his mind. You'll know when you finally meet the right woman. Perhaps this was the moment. A gentle smile appeared on Ethan's face. I'll marry you. Gasps filled the air. Vanessa's jaw dropped. Brian stared in disbelief. What? Ethan stood to his full height and looked at Naomi. If you're certain, I'll stand beside you. Naomi smiled through her tears. For the first time today, I am certain. The pastor, who had quietly followed everyone outside, looked completely confused. You wish to continue with a wedding? Naomi nodded. Yes. The pastor hesitated. This is highly unusual. Mrs. Williams stepped forward. My daughter deserves happiness. Naomi's father looked at Ethan for a long moment. He saw honesty in the stranger's eyes. Finally, he nodded. If this is truly what my daughter wants, I will support her. Brian exploded with laughter. This is going to be the biggest mistake of your life. Naomi calmly removed the expensive diamond ring Brian had given her. She walked over and placed it in his hand. It already happened. Brian frowned. What do you mean? She smiled sadly. My biggest mistake was believing you loved me. The crowd fell silent. Minutes later, the guests returned inside the church. The atmosphere had completely changed. No one could believe what they were about to witness. The bride who had just been abandoned was about to marry a homeless stranger. The pastor took a deep breath and began the ceremony. When he asked if Naomi accepted Ethan as her husband, she answered without hesitation. I do. When he asked Ethan if he accepted Naomi as his wife, he looked into her eyes and smiled warmly. I do. The church remained completely silent as they exchanged simple wedding bands borrowed from the church office because Naomi had returned Brian's engagement ring. There were no expensive promises, no grand decorations, no perfect plans, only two broken strangers choosing to trust each other. Finally, the pastor smiled. By the authority given to me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. A few guests applauded softly. Others remained too shocked to react. Naomi looked at Ethan. For the first time since the nightmare had begun, she felt a small spark of peace. She had no idea who Ethan truly was. She believed she had just married a homeless man with nothing to offer except kindness. Little did she know that the quiet man standing beside her was hiding a secret that would change both of their lives forever. The applause inside the church was weak and uncertain. Most of the guests were too shocked to clap. Some stared at Naomi as though she had lost her mind. Others whispered among themselves. I can't believe she actually married him. A homeless man? Her life is over. What a waste of such a beautiful woman. Naomi heard every word, but she refused to let them break her spirit. She slipped her hand into Ethan's. His hand was warm and steady. He gave it a gentle squeeze, silently reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time that day, she managed a small smile. Brian stood near the altar, his face twisted with disbelief. He had expected Naomi to beg him to come back. Instead, she had married another man in front of everyone. Vanessa folded her arms. She's pretending to be happy. Brian nodded confidently. Give it a few days. When she realizes she's married to a homeless man, she'll come crawling back. Neither of them noticed Ethan quietly looking at them. His calm expression never changed. Without saying a word, he turned away and walked out of the church with his new wife. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and gold. Naomi took a deep breath. What now? She asked softly. Ethan smiled. Now we go home. The word home sounded strange to Naomi. She had imagined spending her wedding night in a luxurious hotel with Brian. Instead, she was walking beside a man she had met less than an hour ago. Yet somehow, she felt safer beside Ethan than she ever had beside Brian. They walked quietly through several streets. People stared at Naomi in her beautiful wedding dress. Children pointed. Some adults whispered. A few laughed. Naomi ignored them. Eventually, they reached an old neighborhood on the edge of the city. The buildings were worn. The roads were cracked. Small children played barefoot outside. Women sat in front of tiny shops selling vegetables and bread. Everyone seemed to know Ethan. "Good evening, Ethan," an elderly woman called with a smile. "Good evening, Mama Grace," he replied politely. A little boy ran toward him. "Uncle Ethan." Ethan laughed and gently lifted the child into the air before setting him back down. "Have you been helping your mother?" The boy nodded proudly. "Yes. Good. Keep being a good boy." Naomi watched the exchange with surprise. Everywhere they walked, people greeted Ethan warmly. No one looked at him with pity. They treated him with respect. She found that unusual. Finally, Ethan stopped in front of a tiny wooden shelter built beside an abandoned warehouse. "This is where I've been staying." Naomi looked around. The small room had a rusty roof and walls made from old wooden boards. Inside was a narrow bed, a small wooden table, 2 plastic chairs, and a shelf holding a few neatly folded clothes. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't even comfortable. But it was surprisingly clean. Naomi looked at Ethan. "You cleaned all this?" He smiled. "I like keeping my surroundings tidy." She nodded. "It feels peaceful." Ethan looked relieved. He had expected disappointment. Instead, Naomi stepped inside with genuine curiosity. She carefully placed her bouquet on the table. "This will make the room look brighter." Ethan smiled again. "You think so?" "Definitely." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt awkward. After all, they were husband and wife. But they were also complete strangers. Naomi finally laughed nervously. "This is probably the strangest wedding day anyone has ever had." Ethan chuckled. "I think you're right." They both laughed. The tension slowly disappeared. Later that evening, Naomi checked the small cupboard. There were only a few pieces of bread, some rice, a small bag of beans, a bottle of cooking oil. Nothing more. She quietly closed the cupboard. Without saying anything, she removed the expensive diamond earrings her mother had given her as a wedding gift. She stared at them for several seconds. "They're beautiful," Ethan said. They were. She smiled sadly. "But we need food more than jewelry." Ethan immediately shook his head. "No." She looked at him. "I won't allow you to sell something that means so much to you." Naomi smiled gently. "My mother didn't give them to me so they could stay in a box. They're meant to help me when life becomes difficult." She placed her hand over his. "Please." Ethan hesitated. He could easily buy an entire shopping mall if he wanted. But revealing the truth now would ruin everything. Finally, he nodded slowly. "If that's truly what you want." "It is." An hour later, Naomi returned from a nearby jewelry shop with a small envelope of cash. She placed it on the table. "We have enough for food and a few household things." Ethan looked at her quietly. She hadn't complained once. Not once. Instead of blaming him for her situation, she was trying to build a life with him. That touched him more deeply than she could ever imagine. The following morning, Naomi woke up before sunrise. She carefully folded her wedding dress and placed it inside a small box. Looking at it brought painful memories. Still, she whispered a prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for giving me another chance." She changed into simple clothes and began sweeping the little room. Then she fetched water from a nearby tap. She washed their clothes by hand. She cleaned every corner until the tiny shelter looked brighter. When Ethan returned from buying fresh bread, he stopped in the doorway. "You've been busy." Naomi smiled. "A clean home makes a peaceful heart." He looked around. The room truly looked different. The floor shone. The bed was neatly made. Even fresh flowers from a nearby field now sat inside an old glass bottle on the table. "It feels like a real home," Ethan said quietly. Naomi smiled. "It is our home." Those words stayed in Ethan's mind long after she walked into the tiny kitchen area. That afternoon, Naomi cooked rice and beans. The meal was simple, yet before eating, she divided the food into 3 plates. Ethan frowned. "We're only 2. Naomi smiled. "We have enough to share." Just then, an elderly neighbor knocked on the door. She looked weak. "I haven't eaten today," the woman admitted shyly. Naomi handed her one of the plates without hesitation. "Please eat." The woman looked overwhelmed. "But this is your lunch. We'll be fine." Tears filled the elderly woman's eyes. "God bless you both." After she left, Ethan looked at Naomi. "You gave away a third of our food." She smiled. "My mother always said food tastes better when it's shared." They quietly shared the remaining meal. That evening, rain began to fall heavily. Water leaked through several holes in the roof. Naomi quickly placed bowls beneath the dripping water. Instead of complaining, she laughed. "I guess our roof likes taking showers too." Ethan laughed harder than he had in months. For a moment, he forgot about board meetings, business reports, luxury cars, private jets. He simply enjoyed being with a woman whose joy wasn't tied to money. Late that night, after Naomi had fallen asleep, Ethan quietly stepped outside. A black luxury SUV slowly pulled into the dark street with its headlights turned off. A well-dressed man stepped out. It was Richard Cole, Ethan's trusted lawyer and the only person who knew where he was. Richard looked at the tiny shelter and sighed. "Chairman, the board is becoming impatient." Ethan folded his arms. "How are the companies performing?" Richard handed him a thick folder. "Profits are still rising, but everyone is asking when you'll return." Ethan glanced toward the small shelter where Naomi slept peacefully. "Not yet." Richard lowered his voice. "Have you told her who you really are?" Ethan smiled softly. "No." "And will you?" "When the time is right." Richard nodded. "I've never seen you smile like this before." Ethan looked at the shelter again. "Neither have I." Unknown to Naomi, the man she believed was a homeless stranger had just received a report worth billions of naira. Yet instead of returning to his luxurious mansion, Ethan quietly walked back into the tiny room, lay down on the simple bed beside his new wife, and smiled. For the first time in many years, he wasn't searching for wealth. He was discovering something far more valuable. A woman whose heart was richer than money could ever buy. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, filling the tiny shelter with a soft golden glow. Naomi was already awake. She quietly prepared breakfast with the little food they had left. Soon, the smell of hot tea and toasted bread filled the room. Ethan opened his eyes and smiled. "Good morning." Naomi looked at him and returned the smile. "Good morning. Breakfast is ready." Ethan sat up. "You wake up very early." "My mother always said that a new day is a gift. I don't like wasting gifts." Ethan admired her quietly. She had lost everything only a few days ago, yet she still found reasons to smile. They sat together and shared their simple breakfast. After eating, Naomi gathered a few documents from an old handbag. "I'll start looking for work today." Ethan frowned slightly. "You don't have to rush." She smiled gently. "We're husband and wife now. If we're going to build a life together, we both have to do our part." Ethan nodded. "I'll also look for work." Naomi reached across the table and held his hand. "We'll make it." Her confidence warmed his heart. If only she knew that he already owned enough companies to employ thousands of people. But she didn't, and that was exactly how Ethan wanted it. He wanted to know whether her love would survive without wealth. Later that morning, they walked through the busy streets together. Naomi visited several shops and offices, asking if they needed workers. Everywhere she went, the answer was the same. "We're sorry. No vacancies. We'll call you." Hours passed. The hot afternoon sun beat down on them. Naomi's feet ached. Still, she refused to give up. As they walked past a small restaurant, the owner came outside. "You there?" Naomi stopped. Yes. I need someone to wash dishes and clean tables. Her eyes brightened. Really? The pay isn't much. I don't mind. You'll start tomorrow. Naomi smiled widely. Thank you so much. The owner nodded before returning inside. Naomi turned to Ethan, her face glowing with excitement. I got a job. Ethan couldn't help smiling. I'm proud of you. She laughed happily. It isn't much, but it's a beginning. He looked at her with admiration. Many people would have complained after losing a luxurious future. Naomi simply thanked God for an honest opportunity. That evening, after returning home, Naomi noticed Ethan sitting quietly outside the shelter. What are you thinking about? She asked. He looked toward the sunset. Life. She sat beside him. I know we don't have much. She smiled. But somehow, I feel richer than I did a week ago. Ethan turned toward her. Why? Because I have peace. She looked into the distance. When I was engaged to Brian, I was always worried. I worried about pleasing him. I worried about keeping him happy. I worried about living up to everyone's expectations. She looked at Ethan and smiled softly. But with you, I can simply be myself. Those words stayed with Ethan long after she went inside. Late that night, after Naomi had fallen asleep, Ethan quietly stepped outside once again. As if on schedule, a sleek black SUV rolled silently into the narrow street. Richard Cole stepped out wearing another perfectly tailored suit. He carried a leather briefcase. Good evening, Chairman. Ethan nodded. Good evening. Richard handed him several folders. The quarterly reports. Ethan flipped through them under the dim streetlight. Even after weeks away from the office, he still understood every figure immediately. How is Cole Global Holdings? Better than expected. Richard smiled proudly. Our construction division signed 3 international contracts. Our technology company has expanded into 2 more countries. Our agricultural investments are breaking production records. Our banking group reported its highest profits ever. Ethan nodded calmly. What about the board? Richard sighed. They're becoming restless. They keep asking when you'll return. They don't understand why the richest man in the country suddenly disappeared. Ethan closed the folder. They'll survive a little longer. Richard hesitated. Chairman, your mansion is still fully staffed. Your private jet hasn't moved. Your family keeps asking questions. When will this end? Ethan looked toward the tiny wooden shelter where Naomi slept peacefully. I haven't finished. Richard followed his gaze. The woman. Ethan smiled. Yes. Richard folded his arms. You've tested many women before. They all failed. Some insulted you. Some ignored you. Some only spoke kindly after learning you had money. He paused. But this one. Ethan nodded slowly. She's different. Richard smiled. I noticed. You've never missed a board meeting for anyone. You've never smiled this much either. Ethan laughed quietly. I didn't expect any of this. Richard looked thoughtful. Should I investigate her? Ethan immediately shook his head. No. I already know everything I need to know. Richard looked surprised. Already? Ethan smiled. When someone gives away her last meal to feed another person, when she sells her own jewelry without complaining, when she chooses kindness after being betrayed, you don't need investigators. You've already seen her heart. Richard nodded slowly. I understand. He reached into the briefcase and handed Ethan a black envelope. These need your signature. Ethan signed several documents using a simple pen. Each signature approved business deals worth billions of naira. Yet he showed no excitement. Richard noticed. A year ago, signing those contracts would have made you smile. Ethan looked at the papers. They're just numbers. Richard raised an eyebrow. And Naomi? A gentle smile appeared on Ethan's face. She's real. The 2 men stood quietly for a moment. Finally, Richard spoke again. There's something else. The media is starting to wonder where you are. They've published stories saying you're seriously ill. Some believe you've secretly moved overseas. Others think you've retired. Ethan chuckled. Let them wonder. Richard smiled. I'll continue protecting your secret. As Richard prepared to leave, he glanced once more at the shelter. I hope she never changes. Ethan looked toward the small window, where Naomi's silhouette could be seen sleeping peacefully. So do I. The SUV disappeared into the darkness. Ethan quietly returned inside. Naomi stirred slightly as he lay beside her. Half asleep, she reached for his hand. Without opening her eyes, she whispered, You came back. He gently squeezed her fingers. I'll always come back. She smiled in her sleep and drifted off again. Ethan lay awake for a long time, watching the woman beside him. For years, he had been surrounded by luxury. He owned skyscrapers, hotels, private islands, and companies spread across several countries. Yet none of those things had ever made him feel as peaceful as this tiny room. He remembered the painful experiences that had brought him here. One woman had accepted his marriage proposal only after learning the size of his fortune. Another secretly dated one of his business rivals while pretending to love him. Several relatives had fought over his wealth before he was even dead. Friends disappeared whenever he refused to finance their lifestyles. Everyone seemed to want something from him. Money, power, influence. No one wanted Ethan. Only what Ethan owned. The loneliness had become unbearable. That was why he had disappeared. He had shaved his beard differently, exchanged designer suits for torn clothes, and walked away from the luxurious life that everyone envied. He wanted one thing money could never buy: genuine love. Now, lying beside Naomi in a small wooden shelter, he finally felt hope. She believed he had nothing. Yet every day, she treated him with respect. She encouraged him. She prayed with him. She dreamed about building a future together, even if it was a simple one. Ethan closed his eyes and whispered quietly into the darkness. Thank you. Not for the billions he possessed. Not for the successful businesses waiting for him. But for the woman sleeping peacefully beside him. Without realizing it, Naomi had already become the greatest treasure in the billionaire's life. 3 weeks passed after Naomi and Ethan got married. Life was far from easy. Every morning before sunrise, Naomi woke up to prepare a simple breakfast of tea and bread before walking to the small restaurant where she worked. She washed mountains of dirty dishes, wiped tables, swept floors, and helped serve customers whenever the restaurant became busy. The work was exhausting. By the time evening came, her back ached, her hands were sore, and her feet felt as though they were on fire. But every day, she returned home with a smile. As she approached the little wooden shelter that evening, she noticed smoke rising from a small charcoal stove outside. Ethan was cooking. He looked up and smiled. Welcome home. Naomi laughed. You're cooking. I thought I'd surprise my hardworking wife. She walked over and peeked into the pot. It smells wonderful. I hope it tastes as good. Naomi gently hugged him from behind. Thank you. For a brief moment, Ethan closed his eyes. No one had ever hugged him simply because they appreciated him. His former girlfriends had hugged him after expensive gifts. Business partners smiled after profitable deals. But Naomi's gratitude came from her heart. After dinner, they sat outside under the evening sky. Children from the neighborhood laughed as they chased one another through the dusty street. An elderly man walked past carrying a heavy sack of vegetables. Without hesitation, Ethan stood. I'll help you. The old man smiled gratefully. Thank you, my son. Ethan carried the heavy sack all the way to the man's house before returning. Naomi watched him with admiration. You never ignore anyone who needs help. He shrugged. If we're able to help, why shouldn't we? Naomi smiled. My mother used to say the same thing. The following afternoon, Naomi's restaurant became unusually busy. Customers filled every table. She hurried from one end of the room to the other carrying trays of food. One customer accidentally knocked over a bowl of hot soup. The soup splashed onto Naomi's arm. She gasped in pain. The restaurant owner rushed over. Are you all right? Naomi forced a smile. I'm fine. The burn stung badly, but she continued working without complaining. Late that evening, she returned home hiding the injury. But Ethan noticed immediately. "What happened to your arm?" She quickly pulled down her sleeve. "It's nothing." He gently took her hand. "It isn't nothing." Seeing the redness on her skin, his face became serious. "You were burned. It was just an accident." Without another word, Ethan walked to a nearby pharmacy and returned with burn cream and bandages. He carefully cleaned the wound. Naomi watched him quietly. "You take such good care of me." He smiled softly. "That's what husbands do." Her eyes filled with tears. Brian had never cared this much. Even when she had been sick, he usually sent expensive gifts instead of spending time with her. Ethan had no money, yet he gave her something far more valuable. His attention, his kindness, his time. A few days later, Naomi received her first salary. It wasn't much. She held the small envelope tightly as she walked home. Instead of spending it on herself, she stopped at the market. She bought rice, beans, vegetables, a small piece of chicken, fresh fruit. When she entered the shelter carrying several shopping bags, Ethan looked surprised. "You bought all this?" She smiled proudly. "I got paid today. You should have bought something for yourself." She laughed. "I did." "What?" She pointed at the groceries. "This." He shook his head with a smile. "You always think about others first." That evening they prepared their first proper meal together. The tiny shelter was filled with laughter. Naomi accidentally dropped flour on Ethan's face. He stared at her in mock surprise. "You started this." Before she could run away, he lightly dusted a little flour onto her cheek. She burst into laughter. Soon both of them were laughing like children. For a few precious moments they forgot about their struggles. Across town, Brian Daniels sat inside an expensive restaurant with Vanessa. His business had begun suffering after the scandal at the church. Several investors no longer trusted him. People questioned his character. Vanessa looked annoyed. "This food is terrible." Brian frowned. "It's the best restaurant in the city. I've had better." She folded her arms. "You've changed." Brian sighed. "So have you." Their relationship was no longer exciting. Without the thrill of stealing someone else's fiancé, they discovered they had very little in common. Vanessa glanced at her phone. Suddenly she smirked. "What?" "I just saw Naomi." Brian looked interested. "Where?" She was leaving a small restaurant wearing a waitress uniform. Brian laughed loudly. "So that's her life now." Vanessa joined in. "Serves her right." Brian leaned back in his chair. "I think it's time we paid the happy couple a visit." The next afternoon, a shiny luxury SUV stopped in front of Ethan and Naomi's shelter. Children gathered around to admire the expensive vehicle. Brian stepped out wearing designer sunglasses. Vanessa followed in an elegant dress. Both wore smug smiles. Naomi looked up from washing clothes. "What are you doing here?" Brian looked around the poor neighborhood with obvious disgust. "I just wanted to see how the newlyweds are surviving." Vanessa covered her nose dramatically. "It smells awful around here." Naomi stood calmly. "We're doing just fine." Brian laughed. "Really?" He glanced at Ethan, who had just returned carrying a bag of vegetables. "So this is your husband?" He looked Ethan up and down. "Torn clothes, worn-out shoes, no job, no future." He chuckled. "You really know how to choose men." Vanessa laughed loudly. Naomi stepped forward before Ethan could respond. "My husband is worth more than you'll ever understand." Brian smirked. "Oh, he respects me. He tells me the truth. He works hard. He helps people. He has never betrayed me." Her voice became firmer. "And that's more valuable than all the money in your bank account." Brian's smile disappeared. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "You're only saying that because you're poor." Naomi looked directly at her former best friend. "No, I'm saying it because I've finally learned the difference between wealth and character." Several neighbors had gathered nearby. They quietly listened to every word. Brian became irritated. "You honestly think this homeless man can give you a good life?" Naomi reached for Ethan's hand. I already have a good life. Brian laughed bitterly. You'll regret this. Naomi smiled calmly. I already regretted trusting you. But marrying Ethan, she looked lovingly at her husband, is the best decision I've ever made. Brian clenched his fists. He had expected Naomi to be miserable. Instead, she looked genuinely happy. That made him strangely uncomfortable. Without another word, he turned around and walked back to his SUV. Vanessa followed behind, still muttering insults. The luxury vehicle sped away. The neighbors applauded softly. One elderly woman smiled at Naomi. You chose well, my daughter. Naomi smiled back. I know. That night, Ethan sat quietly outside beneath the stars. Naomi joined him with 2 cups of warm tea. You've been quiet. He looked at her. Weren't you embarrassed today? She looked confused. About what? Brian mocking me. Naomi smiled gently. I wasn't embarrassed. You weren't. She shook her head. I've met rich people who are poor inside. She reached for his hand. And I've met one man who owns very little but has the richest heart I've ever known. Ethan looked into her eyes. For a moment, he almost told her everything. He almost confessed that he wasn't homeless, that he owned one of the largest business empires in Africa, that the man Brian had mocked could buy every company Brian dreamed of owning. But he stopped himself. Not yet. Instead, he squeezed her hand and smiled. Deep inside, he made a silent promise. One day, when the truth was finally revealed, he would spend the rest of his life proving that the woman who chose him in his lowest disguise would never regret that decision. A month passed peacefully. Naomi settled into her new routine. Every morning, she left for the restaurant before sunrise, and every evening she returned home with a tired but cheerful smile. Life was still difficult, but she no longer complained. She had learned that happiness was not measured by the size of a house or the amount of money in a bank account. It was measured by the love waiting for her when she came home. One evening, as Naomi walked toward the shelter carrying a small bag of groceries, she noticed several children gathered around Ethan. He was repairing an old wooden cart that belonged to an elderly fruit seller. The old woman smiled gratefully. I've been trying to fix it for weeks. Ethan tightened the final bolt and stood up. There you go. The woman pushed the cart gently. It rolled smoothly. Her face lit up with joy. You've saved my business. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a few crumpled Naira notes. Please take this. Ethan smiled and shook his head. No, Mama Grace. I was happy to help. But you worked hard. And you're my neighbor. The elderly woman hugged him. May God bless you, my son. Naomi watched the scene from a distance. Her heart swelled with pride. She had never met anyone as generous as Ethan. He always helped others without expecting anything in return. When he finally noticed her, he smiled. You're home. Naomi walked over. I saw everything. It wasn't a big deal. It was to her. She gently took his hand. You inspire me every day. Ethan smiled quietly. You inspire me too. That night, after dinner, they sat outside beneath the stars. The neighborhood was peaceful. Children had gone home. Only the sound of crickets filled the air. Naomi rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. Can I ask you something? Of course. What was your life like before all this? Ethan stared into the darkness. I've experienced both joy and disappointment. She looked up at him. Did someone hurt you? He smiled sadly. A lot of people did. Naomi reached for his hand. I'm sorry. He squeezed her fingers gently. It's all right. No. She shook her head. Nobody deserves to be treated badly. Ethan looked at her with gratitude. You always care about everyone. She smiled. My mother taught me that kindness costs nothing. Before Ethan could reply, his old phone vibrated inside his pocket. He frowned. Very few people had that number. He looked at the screen. Richard. Ethan stood. I'll be back in a minute. Naomi nodded. I'll make some tea. He walked several meters away before answering. Richard. Richard's voice sounded unusually serious. Chairman. We have a problem. Ethan's expression changed immediately. What happened? The board has called an emergency meeting. They're demanding your return. They believe the company cannot continue without its chairman. Ethan remained silent. Richard continued. Several foreign investors are refusing to approve new projects until they meet you. And that's not all. What else? Someone has been trying to gain control of the company. Ethan frowned. Who? We're still investigating. But whoever it is has already convinced 2 board members to support them. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. I'll think about it. Chairman. Richard hesitated. I don't think we have much time. I understand. After ending the call, Ethan stood quietly beneath the night sky. He knew this day would eventually come. He couldn't remain hidden forever. Thousands of employees depended on him. Millions of customers trusted his companies. His responsibilities could no longer be ignored. But then he thought about Naomi. She still believed he was homeless. Would she forgive him for hiding the truth? Would she think their entire marriage had been built on lies? Those questions troubled him deeply. He slowly returned to the shelter. Naomi handed him a cup of tea. You look worried. He forced a smile. It's nothing. She gently touched his face. You don't have to pretend with me. He looked into her caring eyes. For a brief moment, he almost confessed everything. Instead, he simply said, I may have to leave for a little while tomorrow. Naomi looked surprised. To look for work? He nodded. Something like that. She smiled encouragingly. I'll pray that everything goes well. Her simple words made Ethan's heart ache. If only she knew. The next morning, Ethan left before sunrise. Instead of walking toward the city like usual, a black luxury SUV quietly picked him up several streets away. Richard opened the rear door. Good morning, Chairman. Ethan climbed inside. The SUV drove through the city before stopping beneath the underground entrance of Cole Global Holdings headquarters. The underground parking area was empty except for security personnel waiting in neat rows. As soon as Ethan stepped out, every guard stood at attention. Good morning, Chairman. Ethan nodded politely. He entered a private elevator that carried him directly to the executive floor. When the doors opened, dozens of senior executives immediately stood. Some looked relieved. Others looked nervous. Richard smiled. Welcome back. Ethan walked into the massive boardroom. The room fell completely silent. One elderly board member stood. Chairman Cole, we're grateful you've returned. Ethan sat at the head of the long table. His calm authority filled the room. So, he looked around. I hear some people think this company no longer needs me. Several executives lowered their heads. No one spoke. Ethan opened a thick financial report. In my absence, our profits increased. Good. But our discipline decreased. He looked directly at 2 board members. You approved investments without proper review. Both men looked embarrassed. You delayed employee welfare programs. Another director lowered his head. You ignored 3 charity projects. The room remained silent. Even after weeks away, Ethan knew everything. For nearly 2 hours, he questioned reports, approved contracts, rejected risky proposals, and introduced new plans for expansion. By the end of the meeting, every executive was reminded why Ethan Cole was considered one of the greatest businessmen in Africa. As everyone prepared to leave, Richard approached quietly. The press is waiting outside. They've heard rumors you're here. Ethan looked through the large window. Dozens of reporters had gathered outside the building. Television cameras pointed toward the main entrance. He shook his head. Not today. Richard smiled knowingly. You still don't want the world to know. Not yet. They left through a private exit. An hour later, Ethan returned to the neighborhood wearing the same faded hoodie and torn trousers he had left in that morning. The expensive suit he had worn inside headquarters was carefully packed away. As he walked toward the shelter, he saw Naomi sitting outside, waiting for him. The moment she saw him, she smiled. You're back. She hurried over. How did it go? Ethan smiled gently. It went well. I knew it would. She handed him a small paper bag. I bought your favorite meat pie. He laughed. You remembered. Of course. They walked inside together. Naomi chatted happily about her day at the restaurant while Ethan listened with a smile. She had no idea that only a few hours earlier, the man sitting beside her had chaired a meeting involving billions of naira. Later that night, after Naomi had fallen asleep, Ethan quietly looked at her peaceful face. He knew the secret he had been protecting could not remain hidden forever. Sooner or later, Naomi would discover that the homeless man she had chosen on her wedding day was one of the richest men in Africa. He only prayed that when that day finally came, she would still look at him with the same love she did now. 2 days after Ethan secretly attended the emergency board meeting, life returned to normal, or so Naomi believed. Before sunrise, she was already sweeping the tiny shelter while humming softly. Ethan watched her from the doorway with a smile. You never stop working. Naomi laughed. If I stop, this place will become dusty. He shook his head. You work too hard. She walked over and gently adjusted the collar of his faded hoodie. And you worry too much. They both laughed. After breakfast, Naomi prepared to leave for the restaurant. Before stepping outside, she looked back at Ethan. I'll be home before sunset. I'll be waiting. She smiled. Don't forget to eat. I won't. Naomi waved before disappearing down the dusty road. Ethan stood watching until she was out of sight. The smile slowly faded from his face. His phone vibrated. It was Richard. I'll be there. Less than 20 minutes later, the familiar black SUV quietly picked him up a few streets away. Richard looked unusually tense. The situation is getting worse. Ethan looked at him. What happened? One of our competitors has spread rumors that you've disappeared because the company is collapsing. And the stock price has started falling. Richard handed him a tablet. Our investors are demanding proof that you're still leading the company. Ethan sighed. I've hidden long enough. Richard looked relieved. So you've decided? Ethan nodded slowly. It's time. An hour later, Cole Global Holdings headquarters buzzed with excitement. News had spread throughout the building. The chairman is coming. Employees hurried to straighten their desks. Managers lined the corridors. Security officers stood at attention. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. Outside, dozens of reporters waited behind security barriers. Television crews pointed their cameras toward the main entrance. At exactly 10 o'clock, a long convoy of black luxury vehicles entered the company grounds. The first SUV stopped. Security officers immediately stepped out. Then another, and another. Finally, a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of the building. Every camera flashed. The rear door opened. Polished black shoe touched the ground. Then Ethan stepped out. Gone were the torn clothes. Gone was the faded hoodie. Gone were the worn sneakers. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored charcoal black suit, a crisp white shirt, and an elegant black tie. A luxury watch rested on his wrist. His neatly styled hair and confident smile transformed him into the powerful billionaire he truly was. The crowd gasped. It's Chairman Ethan Cole. He's back. He's really alive. Reporters shouted questions from every direction. Chairman Cole, where have you been? Is it true you've been living in secret? Why did you disappear? Ethan simply smiled. No comments. Security escorted him inside as applause erupted from hundreds of employees. The entire building came alive. Meanwhile, across town, Naomi was serving customers at the restaurant. The television mounted on the wall suddenly switched to a breaking news report. The news anchor spoke excitedly. We have breaking news this morning. Billionaire businessman Ethan Cole has made his first public appearance after disappearing for several months. Every customer turned toward the television. Naomi glanced up absent-mindedly. The tray she was carrying slipped from her hands. Plates crashed onto the floor. Her eyes widened. No! On the television screen stood her husband. The same eyes, the same smile, the same voice, but dressed like one of the most powerful men in the country. Her heart pounded wildly. This can't be. The restaurant owner looked at the television. Chairman Ethan Cole. The richest businessman in Africa. Naomi whispered. Ethan. The owner looked at her. You know him? Naomi couldn't answer. She stared at the screen in complete shock. Her husband, the man she believed was homeless, was standing in front of hundreds of reporters as one of the wealthiest men in the world. Without saying another word, Naomi removed her apron. I have to go. She ran out of the restaurant. Back at Cole Global Holdings, Ethan finished addressing his senior executives. The company's stock had already begun recovering. Investors applauded his return. Employees cheered as he walked through the lobby. Richard smiled. Everything is stabilizing. Ethan nodded. Good. But instead of looking relieved, he seemed worried. Richard understood immediately. Naomi? Ethan sighed. She's probably seen the news by now. What will you do? I'm going home. As Ethan's convoy entered the neighborhood that afternoon, everyone stopped what they were doing. Children pointed excitedly. Neighbors gathered along the roadside. Luxury vehicles had never entered their street before. The convoy stopped directly in front of the tiny wooden shelter. Security officers stepped out first. Then Richard. Finally, Ethan emerged from the Rolls-Royce. The neighborhood fell silent. The same man they had known as the humble homeless neighbor now stood dressed like royalty. Mama Grace covered her mouth. Our Ethan. The fruit seller whispered. He's rich. The children stared in amazement. Just then, Naomi appeared at the end of the street. She had run all the way from the restaurant. She stopped several meters away. Her eyes filled with tears. Ethan looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The entire neighborhood watched in silence. Finally, Naomi walked toward him. With every step, her heart grew heavier. When she finally stood before him, she looked into his eyes. They were talking about you. Ethan nodded quietly. Yes. The television. Yes. You're. He lowered his head slightly. My name is Ethan Cole, the chairman of Cole Global Holdings. Tears rolled down Naomi's cheeks. You lied to me. His heart broke at the pain in her voice. I hid the truth. Why? Because I needed to know if someone could love me without knowing my wealth. She looked away. So our marriage was real. My love for you is real. Every moment we shared was real. Naomi struggled to hold back her tears. You let me sell my earrings. I know. You let me work until my hands bled. Pain filled Ethan's face. I wanted to tell you so many times. But every time I looked into your eyes, I became afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that once you knew who I really was, you'd think every smile I gave you had been a lie. Naomi wiped her tears. You should have trusted me. I know. I'm sorry. His voice trembled. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of losing someone I truly loved. Silence filled the street. The neighbors quietly watched with tears in their eyes. Richard stepped forward. Mrs. Cole. Naomi looked at him. I've known Chairman Ethan for over 20 years. I've never seen him love anyone the way he loves you. She remained silent. Richard continued. Before he met you, many women wanted his money. Some pretended to love him. Some tried to trap him. Others betrayed him. He became convinced genuine love no longer existed. He smiled softly. Then he met you. The woman who chose him when she believed he owned nothing. Naomi slowly looked back at Ethan. He wasn't hiding behind expensive clothes, nor behind torn ones. He simply stood there with tears in his eyes. The proud billionaire looked more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered. I only wanted to know if love like yours still existed. Naomi's anger slowly melted into sadness. She remembered every moment they had shared. The nights they laughed together. The meals they cooked. The neighbors he helped without expecting anything in return. The way he cared for her burned arm. None of those moments had been fake. They had all been real. Tears streamed down her face as she stepped closer. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around him. Ethan held her tightly, relief washing over him. I'm sorry, he whispered again. Naomi rested her head against his chest. I'll forgive you. She looked into his eyes. But never hide the truth from me again. A smile spread across Ethan's face. I promise. The neighbors burst into applause. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Mama Grace smiled proudly. I always knew our Ethan was special. As the sun began to set, Ethan held Naomi's hand. Come with me. She looked at the long line of luxury cars waiting nearby. Where are we going? He smiled warmly. Home. Naomi glanced back at the tiny wooden shelter where they had built their love. Then she looked at the man who had once appeared to have nothing. She realized that whether he lived in a wooden shelter or a grand mansion, he was still the same kind, gentle man she had married. Hand in hand, they walked toward the waiting Rolls-Royce, unaware that Brian and Vanessa had just watched everything from inside their own car parked across the street. The shock on their faces was only the beginning of the regret that would soon consume their lives. The black Rolls-Royce glided silently through the city as Naomi sat beside Ethan in complete silence. She looked out the window, watching the familiar streets disappear behind them. Her mind was still trying to understand everything that had happened. Just that morning, she believed she was the wife of a homeless man. Now she had discovered that her husband was one of the richest businessmen in Africa. Ethan glanced at her several times. He wanted to say something, but he wasn't sure where to begin. Finally, he broke the silence. Are you angry with me? Naomi looked at him. I was. He lowered his eyes. I deserve that. She sighed. But as I sat in that restaurant thinking about everything we've been through, I realized something. Ethan waited quietly. The man I fell in love with wasn't your money. It wasn't your companies. It wasn't your mansion. She smiled gently. It was the man who fixed an old woman's cart. The man who gave away his food. The man who treated my burns. The man who held my hand when I thought my world had ended. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. That man is still me. I know. She reached for his hand. I just wish you had trusted me sooner. I'm sorry. She nodded. And I forgive you. A smile slowly spread across Ethan's face. For the first time since revealing his secret, he could finally breathe. An hour later, the convoy entered a quiet, luxurious neighborhood lined with tall trees and elegant homes. Naomi stared through the window in amazement. Every mansion looked like a palace. Finally, the gates of the largest estate slowly opened. The convoy drove inside. A magnificent fountain stood proudly in the center of a beautifully landscaped garden. Rows of colorful flowers stretched along a long stone driveway. Luxury cars were parked neatly beside the main entrance. The mansion itself rose 3 stories high, with tall glass windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Naomi whispered, "This is your home?" Ethan smiled. "Our home." The car stopped. Before Ethan could open the door, dozens of staff members had already lined both sides of the entrance. As soon as the couple stepped out, everyone bowed respectfully. "Welcome home, Chairman." "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole." Naomi froze. She had never experienced anything like this. The butler stepped forward. "Mrs. Cole, it is an honor to finally meet you." Naomi smiled shyly. "Thank you." Inside the mansion, she looked around in disbelief. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Elegant paintings decorated the walls. Beautiful marble floors stretched from one end of the house to the other. The staircase curved gracefully toward the upper floor. Everything was breathtaking. Ethan watched her reaction carefully. "I know it's different." She laughed softly. "A little different?" He smiled. "Just a little." Naomi looked around once more before turning to him. "I'll need a map just to find the kitchen." They both laughed. The staff smiled warmly. That evening, Ethan introduced Naomi to everyone working in the house. Instead of acting proudly, Naomi greeted each employee with kindness. She learned their names. She thanked them for welcoming her. She even helped one of the housekeepers carry a tray of fresh flowers. The elderly housekeeper looked embarrassed. "Mrs. Cole, please allow me." Naomi smiled. "We're carrying them together." The woman couldn't stop smiling. Word quickly spread throughout the mansion. The chairman married a wonderful woman. The new madam is so humble. The following morning, Naomi wandered into the large kitchen. Several chefs immediately stood. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole." She smiled. "Good morning." One chef asked politely, "What would you like for breakfast?" Naomi looked at the long list of expensive meals. She smiled. "Can we have simple rice porridge today?" The chefs looked surprised. "Of course." "And," she hesitated, "please prepare enough for everyone working in the house." One young chef blinked. "You mean all the staff?" Naomi nodded. "We're one family." The staff exchanged surprised glances. No previous owner had ever asked them to eat together. When Ethan heard about it later, he smiled proudly. "I married the right woman." Later that week, Ethan invited Naomi to visit one of his office buildings. As they walked through the lobby, employees greeted them respectfully. "Good morning, Chairman." "Good morning, Mrs. Cole." Naomi smiled at everyone. She noticed a cleaner struggling to push a heavy cleaning cart. Without thinking, she walked over. "Let me help." The cleaner looked shocked. "Mrs. Cole, please don't." "It's all right." Together, they pushed the cart down the hallway. Several employees watched in amazement. One manager whispered, "She's helping the cleaners?" Another smiled. "No wonder the chairman loves her." Ethan stood quietly nearby, his heart filled with pride. He had married a woman whose kindness never changed, no matter where she was. Days later, Naomi made another surprising request. She entered Ethan's study carrying a notebook. "I've been thinking." He smiled. "That usually means you have an idea." She laughed. "I do." She opened the notebook. "I want us to help people." Ethan leaned forward. "Tell me." She pointed to a list she had written. "A shelter for homeless families. Scholarships for children who can't afford school. Free meals every weekend. Medical support for elderly people living alone." She looked at him. "I know these projects will cost money, but I've lived among people who have almost nothing. They don't need pity. They need opportunities." Ethan smiled proudly. "I couldn't agree more." Within a few weeks, construction began on the Naomi Hope Foundation. News of the project spread quickly across the country. Reporters praised the couple for investing millions into helping struggling families instead of showing off their wealth. One afternoon, Naomi insisted on visiting the first shelter before its official opening. Instead of arriving with cameras and speeches, she quietly walked through the building, speaking with workers and listening to families who would soon move in. She met a young widow caring for 3 children. The woman wiped away tears. "I don't know how to thank you." Naomi gently held her hand. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me you'll never stop believing that better days can come." The woman nodded through her tears. "I promise." As they drove home that evening, Ethan looked at Naomi. "Do you know something?" She smiled. "What?" "You've changed my company." She looked confused. "I have." He nodded. "My employees work harder. My managers smile more. Our charity department has never been busier." She laughed softly. "I only wanted to help. You've done much more than that." He reached for her hand. "You've reminded me why success matters." She looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" He smiled warmly. "Money means very little if it only makes one person comfortable." He looked out the window as the city lights began to shine. "But when it changes thousands of lives, that's when it becomes a blessing." Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think we're just getting started." Ethan kissed her forehead gently. "We are." Far away, Brian sat alone in his office, watching another news report about Ethan and Naomi's charity work. He stared at the television in silence. The woman he had betrayed wasn't using wealth to seek revenge. She was using it to change lives. For the first time in many months, Brian felt something deeper than regret. He realized he hadn't just lost a beautiful fiancée. He had lost the best woman he would ever meet. Several months passed. The Naomi Hope Foundation became one of the country's most respected charities. Thousands of homeless families found safe places to live. Children who had once believed they would never attend school proudly wore new uniforms because of the scholarships Naomi had created. Free medical clinics traveled to villages where healthcare had always been difficult to find. Wherever Naomi went, people welcomed her with smiles and prayers. She never forgot where she had come from. She still visited the old neighborhood where she and Ethan had lived after their wedding. She often sat with Mama Grace, shared meals with the children, and spoke kindly with every family. The people there no longer saw her as a billionaire's wife. To them, she was simply Naomi. One afternoon, as Naomi prepared to leave the foundation's office, Richard knocked gently on her door. "Mrs. Cole," she smiled. "Come in, Richard." He stepped inside carrying a folder. "I thought you should know." Naomi looked at him curiously. "What is it?" He hesitated before speaking. "Brian Daniels' company has officially gone bankrupt." Naomi lowered her eyes. She remained silent. Richard continued. "He lost most of his investors after his reputation was destroyed. He made several poor business decisions, and the banks have seized his remaining properties." Naomi slowly closed the folder. "I never wanted this for him." Richard nodded. "I know." She looked out the window. "I only wanted him to learn that honesty matters." Later that evening, another piece of news spread through the city. Vanessa had left Brian. The same woman who had helped destroy Naomi's wedding had walked away after Brian lost his wealth. Reporters claimed she had moved in with another wealthy businessman. When Ethan heard the news, he shook his head. Money brought them together. Naomi sighed, and money pulled them apart. A week later, Naomi was leaving the foundation after visiting several families when she noticed a familiar figure sitting quietly on a bench outside the gate. His expensive suits were gone. His once confident posture had disappeared. His hair was untidy. His shoulders were slumped. It was Brian. For a moment, Naomi simply stood there. Brian slowly looked up. Their eyes met. He stood immediately. "Naomi." She walked toward him calmly. "It's been a long time." He nodded. "Yes." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Brian broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Naomi listened quietly. "I treated you terribly. I betrayed you. I embarrassed you in front of everyone." His voice trembled. "I thought money and beauty were all that mattered." He looked down at his worn shoes. "I was wrong." Naomi remained silent. Brian continued. "When Vanessa left, I realized she never loved me. She only loved the life I could give her." Tears filled his eyes. "And then I remembered." He looked at Naomi. "You loved me before I became successful. You stood beside me when my business struggled. You believed in me. I threw all of that away." Naomi took a slow breath. "I did love you." Brian nodded sadly. "I know. I didn't deserve it." He looked at her with regret. "Can you ever forgive me?" Naomi thought for a long moment. Then she smiled gently. "I forgave you a long time ago." Brian looked surprised. "You did." She nodded. "Carrying bitterness only hurts the person carrying it. So yes, I forgive you." Hope briefly appeared in Brian's eyes. "Does that mean?" Naomi gently shook her head before he could finish. "No." His shoulders dropped. "I love my husband." A warm smile spread across her face. "Ethan gave me the respect you never did. He stood beside me when my heart was broken. He showed me that love isn't measured by money." Brian lowered his head. "I understand." She looked at him kindly. "I truly hope you rebuild your life, but not by chasing wealth." She smiled softly. "Build your character first." Brian nodded slowly. "I'll try." Just then, a black Rolls-Royce pulled up beside them. Ethan stepped out. He immediately walked toward Naomi. Brian looked at him with shame. "I'm sorry." He extended his hand. "For everything." Ethan looked at the hand for a moment before shaking it. "The past cannot be changed." He spoke calmly. "But your future still can." Brian nodded gratefully. "Thank you." He stepped back. Before walking away, he looked at Naomi one final time. "I hope you're happy." Naomi smiled. I am. Brian smiled sadly. I'm glad. He turned and slowly disappeared down the street. Neither Naomi nor Ethan said a word until he was out of sight. Finally, Ethan looked at his wife. Are you all right? She nodded. I feel peaceful. He gently held her hand. You have a beautiful heart. She smiled. I simply chose to let go. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders as they walked toward the waiting car. Across the street, several reporters quietly captured the moment. The headlines the next morning spread across the country. Billionaire's wife forgives the man who humiliated her on her wedding day. People praised Naomi not because she had become wealthy, but because success had never changed the kindness in her heart. As the sun began to set, Ethan looked at his wife with admiration. The greatest decision he had ever made was disguising himself as a homeless man. Because in doing so, he had found the one woman who loved him long before she ever knew he was a billionaire. 1 year later, the morning sun shone brightly over the beautiful gardens of St. Matthew's Church, the same church where Naomi's life had changed forever. This time, there were no whispers of betrayal, no tears of heartbreak, no broken promises. Instead, the church was filled with laughter, joy, and genuine love. Family members, friends, employees, and hundreds of people whose lives had been changed by the Naomi Hope Foundation gathered to celebrate Ethan and Naomi's first wedding anniversary. The church looked even more beautiful than it had on their wedding day. White roses decorated every aisle, while soft music filled the air. Naomi stood in a private room wearing an elegant white gown. She smiled as she looked at herself in the mirror. Her mother walked in and hugged her tightly. I've never seen you this happy. Naomi smiled. I never imagined that the worst day of my life would become the beginning of the best one. Her mother gently wiped away a tear. God has a beautiful way of turning pain into blessings. Naomi nodded. He truly does. Meanwhile, Ethan waited at the altar wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. Richard stood beside him as his best man. Richard smiled. Remember when you insisted on living in that tiny wooden shelter? Ethan laughed. I remember every moment. You could have returned to your mansion at any time. I know. Richard smiled warmly. But if you had, you might never have discovered what true love looks like. Ethan looked toward the church entrance. And I would never have found Naomi. Moments later, the music changed. Everyone stood. The church doors slowly opened. Naomi walked down the aisle, holding her father's arm. She looked even more beautiful than she had 1 year earlier. But this time, there was no fear in her eyes. Only happiness. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. As she reached the altar, he gently took her hands. The pastor smiled. Last year, your marriage began under unusual circumstances. Soft laughter filled the church. But today, you stand here not as strangers making a desperate decision, but as two people who have proven that true love can survive every trial. The congregation applauded. The pastor invited them to renew their vows. Ethan looked lovingly into Naomi's eyes. Naomi, 1 year ago, you chose me when you believed I had nothing. You gave me hope when I had lost faith in people. You loved the man behind the torn clothes. I promise that for the rest of my life, I will honor your trust, protect your heart, and never hide the truth from you again. Tears filled Naomi's eyes. She smiled before speaking. Ethan, 1 year ago, I thought my life was over. I believed betrayal had stolen my future. But God had already prepared someone far better for me. You've shown me that real love is patient, kind, honest, and faithful. I promise to stand beside you whether life brings joy or challenges. I will always love the man who first offered me a handkerchief when my heart was broken. Many guests wiped tears from their eyes. Even Richard quietly reached for a handkerchief. The pastor smiled. You may kiss your wife. As Ethan gently kissed Naomi, the church erupted into applause. Outside, white doves were released into the bright blue sky. After the ceremony, everyone gathered in the church garden for a celebration. Children from the Naomi Hope Foundation laughed as they played together. Families whose lives had been transformed thanked Ethan and Naomi personally. One elderly woman hugged Naomi tightly. "If it wasn't for your foundation, my grandchildren wouldn't be in school today." Naomi smiled warmly. "Seeing them smile is all the thanks I need." Later that evening, Ethan led Naomi to a beautifully decorated stage. A large curtain stood behind them. He smiled. "I have one last surprise." Naomi laughed. "You've already surprised me enough." Ethan nodded toward Richard. Richard pulled the curtain aside. Behind it was a large stone sign that read, "The Naomi Williams Cole Hope Center." Naomi covered her mouth in shock. "Ethan," he took her hands, "this foundation began because of your heart. You reminded me that wealth only has meaning when it changes lives. So from today forward, every family we help will know the name of the woman who inspired it all." Tears rolled down Naomi's cheeks as she hugged him tightly. "I love you. I love you more." As the guests applauded, Brian quietly stood near the church gate. He watched from a distance with a gentle smile. For the first time since losing Naomi, he no longer wished she were his. Instead, he was grateful she had found the happiness she deserved. He turned and walked away peacefully, determined to become a better man. As the sun began to set, Ethan and Naomi stood together, holding hands as they looked across the gardens. Ethan smiled. "Do you ever regret asking a homeless stranger to marry you?" Naomi laughed softly. "Never." She looked into his eyes. "People thought I was saving a homeless man that day." She squeezed his hand gently. "But the truth is, we were saving each other." Ethan smiled. "And choosing you was the greatest blessing of my life." Hand in hand, they walked toward their family and friends, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives together. A life built not on wealth, but on trust, kindness, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Thank you so much for watching this beautiful story. We hope it touched your heart and reminded you that true love is found in character, not in wealth. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story. Leave a comment below and tell us, where are you watching from? We'd love to know. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you. See you in the next story.